And good morning from Mission Control Houston. I'm NASA's Dan Hewitt, and you're joining us live here in the International Space Station Flight Control Room in Houston, Texas. Well, today we were planning on showing you a spacewalk today, but we are now stepping out of those spacewalk preparations. So here is the latest on the situation that we're in right now. So while the teams were going through the steps to get ready for today's spacewalk, we actually had Frank Rubio and Josh Cassada suited up inside the Quest airlock. The ground control teams got a late notification for a conjunction. So a conjunction is the possibility that the station and a piece of space debris will come close to each other. And so we have a couple of steps that happen, but when we got that late notice of the conjunction, the teams made the call shortly after 4 a.m. Central Time, 5 a.m. Eastern Time, to start backing out of the EVA, the spacewalk preparations, and to begin preparing for what's known as a PDAM, a predetermined debris avoidance maneuver. This is a standard maneuver that we're able to do using engines either on the Russian segment of the space station or on the Russian Progress, which we're looking at using the Progress thrusters this morning to maneuver the station away from the predicted track. So the teams have been tracking this piece of space debris over the last couple of days. It's a fragment of a Russian frigate upper stage. It's sparsely tracked, but as they continue to get tracking data as of this morning, right before we got into the final stages of our spacewalk prep, it went red. And all red really means is we have green, yellow, and red. And those colors are based off of the predicted essentially how close the predicted track could come to the station. In this case, the latest predictions looking like the fragment could pass within less than a quarter of a mile from the station. So armed with that data, the teams made the call to stand down from today's spacewalk and start moving into conducting this debris avoidance maneuver. So we're going to be looking at using the thrusters on the Russian Progress 81, and those are going to fire a little bit later this morning to move the station out of the way. So at the last tracking, we're looking for that maneuver to occur around 7:42 a.m. Central Time, 8:42 a.m. Eastern. That could move as they continue to do a lot of the different calculations. A lot goes into deciding exactly how to execute these kind of maneuvers, including just how long you need to fire to get out of the way, make sure you're not moving into the way of anything else, and then any other kind of downrange operations. We actually had a reboost scheduled a little bit later this week, so this debris avoidance maneuver could end up replacing that reboost and get us to a desired altitude that we were looking at. So the teams will be looking to do that maneuver within the next couple of hours. Again, as of this moment, we're looking at a thruster firing time of about 7:42 a.m. Central, but that is subject to change. Meanwhile, on board the station right now, the crew out of their suits. Again, we had Frank Rubio and Josh Cassada in the airlock being assisted by NASA's Nicole Mann and Japanese astronaut Koichi Wakata to get ready for today's spacewalk. And then about an hour and a half ago, the teams, again, got that notification that the updated tracking data on that piece of upper stage debris showed a closer approach than we had tracked initially, and that's what caused them to decide to stand down from today's spacewalk. So both Cassada and Rubio at this point, they're out of their spacesuits. They've been out of them for at least 30 minutes now. The teams have stowed all of the spacewalk gear for now. We don't have an expected date for when we can try to go out the door again, but they are trying to preserve every possible opportunity to do it as soon as possible. So we don't have that information yet, but once we get that and anything additional, we will be sure to provide it. But if you are just tuning in, again, no spacewalk today. The teams got notification of conjunction, essentially a piece of space debris passing closer than we want to the space station. And so the call was made to stand down from today's spacewalk and move into doing a debris avoidance maneuver, specifically what's called a PDAM. It's a predetermined debris avoidance maneuver. So right now the teams here in Mission Control Houston are actually just executing a handover. So the Orbit 1 team going off console, they've been on since about midnight. Or actually a little bit before then. The Orbit 2 team, which was originally coming in to execute a spacewalk today, is now going to be overseeing the station and the crew as they go through this debris avoidance maneuver. So again, we're expecting that maneuver to happen within a couple of hours from now. The latest TIG or targeted ignition time that we have is about 7:42 a.m. Central, 8:42 a.m. Eastern. But again, that is just a target right now. We'll be sure to provide an updated time once that maneuver takes place. And we are planning on using thrusters on the Russian Progress 81 spacecraft. We're able to use Progress thrusters to do these avoidance maneuvers or reboosts that are necessary to maintain altitude for the station. We can also use thrusters on the Russian segment itself, but in this case, we're looking at using Progress. So the crew not in any danger. We've done a number of these avoidance maneuvers throughout the life of the space station, as you will occasionally come into close proximity to debris. So thankfully, we're able to work with Space Command and others who are responsible for tracking these items, who then give an update to our topo, our trajectory officer here in Mission Control. This is a piece of debris that's been tracked over the last couple of days, and its tracking data was always in our green or yellow range, which don't necessitate doing a maneuver. But shortly after about 4 a.m. Central Time, 5 a.m. Eastern, the updated tracking data showed that red, showing that the predicted path of the fragment could pass within less than a quarter mile of the station. So once that new data came in, the teams made the decision, stand down from the spacewalk and step into doing this debris avoidance maneuver. So we're looking for that maneuver to happen within the next 2 hours, roughly. Again, using thrusters on the Russian Progress 81. And that will move the station so we're further away from the predicted track. Teams still have to walk through all of the different variables that go into timing, duration of the boost, everything like that. So that 7:42 a.m. Central, that's just a target time right now. Once we actually execute the burn, we'll be able to give all of the usual stats, when the burn happened, how long we fired those thrusters for, how much we changed the station's altitude by. Right now, everything's still in that planning phase, but we are looking for that maneuver to happen. The time of closest approach, so essentially when we expected the debris to come the closest, was about 10:17 a.m. Central, so a little less than 5 hours from now. So the maneuver will happen in advance of that, moving the station out of the way into a safer path, and then also potentially replacing a reboost that was on the plan for a little bit later this week. So they're working through all of those different variables right now to get us to performing this reboost or this debris avoidance maneuver. But again, if you're tuning in to see a spacewalk today, no spacewalk today. We'll see when the spacewalk ends up taking place. We don't have a date picked out yet, as all of this is developing in real time. But they did everything they could to try and keep all of the different hardware collected, the suit hardware itself, everything still inside the airlock, to hopefully go out the door another day this week. But we will have to wait and see after teams have moved through this debris avoidance maneuver planning, and they can start planning what happens throughout the rest of the week. So still more to come, but just letting everybody know the current situation. Again, no spacewalk today. We're going to be doing a debris avoidance maneuver instead, getting out of the way of a fragment of a Russian frigate upper stage. That, with tracking data that we just got this morning, a little over an hour and a half ago, that was showing that it could pass within less than a quarter mile of the station. So that crossed into the red zone. We have green, yellow, and red. And once things go red, we need to go and do a maneuver. So we're going to be using the thrusters on the Russian Progress 81, currently docked to station, raise the altitude of the space station, get out of the way of this debris, and then we'll be able to continue on with normal operations.
The 30 minutes, or what do we have passed? Just, yeah.
And yes, we would have held for about 20 to 30 minutes to keep us on the timeline for your essay.
Okay, great to know. Thank you.
And once again, this is Mission Control Houston. If you're tuning in, we are not going to have a spacewalk today. We were planning on showing you views inside of the airlock right now as Josh Cassada and Frank Rubio were preparing to go out for another spacewalk to install a new rollout solar array as our continuing augmentation of the station's power system is ongoing. But we will not be doing that spacewalk today. Again, just to recap, the teams got late notice of a possible conjunction, essentially a piece of space debris coming too close to the space station, and made the decision a little after 4 a.m. Central Time, 5 a.m. Eastern, to stand down from our spacewalk preparations and conduct a debris avoidance maneuver. So at this point in the morning, we were already pretty well into our spacewalk preparations. Both Cassada and Rubio were suited up inside of the Quest airlock, getting ready to do a lot of their pre-breathe protocol that just helps to condition their bodies for the 7+ hours operating in a lower pressure environment. But they then got the word from the ground that we were going to be standing down from today's spacewalk to go do this debris avoidance maneuver. So we're tracking a piece of debris. It's from a Russian frigate upper stage, and it's sparsely tracked. So anytime a piece of debris is pretty sparsely tracked, it can have some erratic data readbacks for just how close it's going to come. But the updated tracking as of this morning moved us into red. Again, we have green, yellow, and red, essentially based off of how close the expected track of a piece of debris is going to be to the space station. And once we get into red, we have to take action, whether that's a debris avoidance maneuver or some other precautionary measure to help keep the crew safe. In this case, we have enough notification that we're able to step into our debris avoidance maneuver. So we're going to be using the thrusters on the Russian Progress 81, firing those for expected several minutes. We'll get the full duration and everything after the maneuver has actually happened. Targeting that thruster firing to happen right now at about 7:42 a.m. Central Time, 8:42 a.m. Eastern. That's just a target time. Again, the team's still stepping through all of their calculations for how long this maneuver is going to last. Exactly when we're going to do it is we're not just having to think about making sure we're getting out of the way of this debris, but not moving the station into a path of anything else. So always a lot of different variables to take into account whenever you're making a maneuver like this and moving something as massive and complex as the space station in orbit around the Earth. So while all that's happening, we are looking at about 2 hours from now, roughly, doing that maneuver. And that's going to raise the space station's orbit, get us out of the way of this debris, which with the latest track, which triggered all of this work, had it passing within less than a quarter mile of the space station. So once we knew it was coming that close, the call was made, standing down from the spacewalk for the maneuver. We do not have a new date for this spacewalk. The crew, they're already out of their suits. They've stowed a lot of the hardware, but it's all being kept pretty close on hand in case we're able to do the spacewalk later this week, possibly tomorrow. None of that has been decided yet, and the teams will step immediately into planning any schedule impacts. You have obviously other things you have to balance anytime you're doing a shift in the schedule. Could be impacting science, anything like that in the next day. So they're going to start working through all of those inputs once we're through this debris avoidance maneuver itself. So we're expecting that thruster firing to happen in about 2 hours. It could change just based off final calculations. And as always, we'll be able to put out our data both on the station blog and through social media on what time the thruster firing happens, how long the thrusters fire for, what our change in altitude is, all of those data points. So we'll be providing that, so look for that across the web in a couple hours after we're through this maneuver. But no spacewalk today. We'll see the next time that we get a chance to send them out the door to complete this spacewalk. But again, the crew is going to have to replan their schedule for the day. So the teams here in Mission Control also working through that. And then anything else that they need to do to try and preserve our opportunities to do the spacewalk potentially later this week. So we will continue to stand by for just a little bit because, again, if you're tuning in expecting to see a spacewalk today, no spacewalk. Crew is stood down as we're going to be doing this debris avoidance maneuver, getting out of the way of a piece of debris that the trajectory officer here in Houston's been tracking. Up until this morning, it was in the green or yellow areas, which don't require a maneuver. It's far enough away from the station that it's of low concern. But the updated tracking data this morning went into the red, so essentially saying it's coming close enough to the station that we have to take action. In this case, telling us it was potentially passing within less than a quarter mile of the space station. So once they knew that, we stood down from the spacewalk preparations and stepped into doing this debris avoidance maneuver. All right, and one final time, this is Mission Control Houston getting some views from the exterior of the space station right now, as we were planning on seeing a couple of spacewalkers in these camera views, but if you're just now tuning in, we are not doing a spacewalk today. Call was made to stand down a little after 4 a.m. Central, 5 a.m. Eastern. Once the trajectory officer here in Mission Control Houston got some updated tracking data on a piece of debris from a Russian frigate upper stage. The new tracking data showed it passing as close as a little less than a quarter of a mile away from the space station. And armed with that new data, the teams made the call to stand down from today's spacewalk. When the call was made, we were already well into our spacewalk preparations. Both Frank Rubio and Josh Cassada had suited up in their extravehicular mobility units, those big white suits in the Quest airlock, and we're moving into their pre-breathe protocol, getting ready to spend about 7 hours walking out in the vacuum of space. But then the teams with this new tracking data made the call to stand down from today's spacewalk so we could go and perform a PDAM, a predetermined debris avoidance maneuver, essentially using thrusters on the Progress spacecraft currently docked to the station to raise the station's orbit and move out of the predicted track of this space debris. So we don't have an exact time for when this maneuver is going to happen. Our targeted time right now is 7:42 a.m. Central, 8:42 a.m. Eastern. That could change as they continue to, again, you have to take a lot of different variables into account, not just getting out of the way of this debris, making sure you're not putting yourself in the path of anything else, and also taking into account any reboosts that were planned down the road, so we could potentially raise it enough to accomplish what that reboost had been planned to do anyway. So they're walking through all of those different calculations, and then we're expecting that debris avoidance maneuver to happen within the next 2 hours or so. The time of closest approach was about 10:17 a.m. Central, 11:17 a.m. Eastern. That time of closest approach is just the time when we predict it would pass the piece of debris would pass the closest to the space station. So several hours from now, and several hours after we plan the reboost to take place. So that will be coming up. Stay tuned to NASA and Space Station social media, and the Space Station blog will be able to provide you details of that debris avoidance maneuver after it happens, everything from the time of ignition, how long the burn happened, and what our change in altitude for the station is. So all of that's still to come. But again, keys today, no spacewalk today. The teams will step into replanning, see if there's another opportunity to do the spacewalk later this week, as they were able to get the crew out of their suits and stow a lot of that hardware still in the Quest airlock. So after we're through all of the steps required for this debris avoidance, they'll be able to start stepping through the spacewalk preparations and see if we have an opportunity later this week. So with that, never a dull day on board the International Space Station. Stay tuned to our social medias. We give you some continued updates on the situation, the crew not in danger, and the station about to move out of the way of this debris. So not the first time we've done this and won't be the last, but this just, again, speaking to those capabilities and some of the realities of operating in low Earth orbit. So no spacewalk today. Stay tuned. We'll tell you when another one's coming up. Stay tuned and we'll provide continued details on this debris avoidance maneuver. For now, though, we are going to go ahead and sign off. We'll see if we're back with you a little bit later this week. For now, though, signing off, this is Mission Control Houston.